Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're plunging into the latest developments in the Israel-Iran conflict. It's a situation that's really evolving by the hour.
Absolutely, and the implications go far, far beyond just the immediate region. The complexity is just, well, immense.
And the stakes couldn't be higher, really.
What's fascinating here, I think, is how all these different threads are interwoven. You've got diplomacy, military strikes, Iran's internal politics, regional alliances. They're all tangled together in this rapidly unfolding story.
Yeah, it's not just what's happening on the ground, is it?
No, exactly. It's why it's happening, the sort of strategic thinking behind each move, and, what it might signal for the future of the Middle East, and frankly, for global stability, too.
Absolutely. So our mission today is really to try and cut through some of that noise. We've sifted through a mountain of the latest intelligence, the analyses, really trying to consolidate the critical info from just the past 24 hours.
A huge amount to get through.
It is. The goal here is to give you the crucial nuggets, help you understand what's most important in this really complex, fast-changing landscape. Think of it as your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on this.
Precisely. We'll be looking at the diplomatic tightrope walk, the intensifying military actions from both sides, some really significant and frankly quite telling shifts inside Iran's leadership as well. And of course, the ripple effects across the whole region, especially with those Iranian-backed groups. It all helps us connect these individual pieces, these dots, to paint a much larger and, let's be honest, a more alarming picture.
So let's start our journey into this, maybe not on the battlefield itself, but in those quieter corridors of diplomacy.
Yeah.
Because Iran seems to be sending out some really intriguing, almost contradictory signals, doesn't it?
It really does. It's like watching, I don't know, a chess match where one player offers a handshake but is simultaneously reaching for a different, maybe more aggressive piece.
Yeah. So on one hand, Iranian officials have been indicating some willingness to negotiate an end to this conflict. We've seen reports that the U.S. Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, he's been in contact with Iran's Foreign Affairs Minister, Abbas Araki.
Right, and apparently Witkoff received, quote, some indications of interest in resuming talks. That's a key phrase, some indications. Vague, but potentially significant.
And it's not just words, is it? There was that report on June 18th about 2 Iranian government planes landing in Oman.
Yes, and Oman, as many will know, has often played that role, hasn't it? A quiet but effective mediator between Tehran and Washington. A discreet back channel.
So while the purpose of those flights isn't clear,
It certainly hints at potential back-channel activity, doesn't it? A quiet effort, perhaps, to bridge what's become a very wide communication gap. And then you have Iraqi himself announcing a meeting in Geneva.
right, scheduled for June 20th with the UK, France, Germany, the EU, specifically to discuss the nuclear issue and latest regional developments. That sounds like a very clear diplomatic front opening up.
It does. It signals they're willing to engage on that level, at least.
And France, too, has said it's ready to support negotiations. Their foreign minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, mentioned France is prepared to help, quote, scale back Iran's nuclear enrichment and ballistic missile programs.
Ah, but scale back. That's where the contradiction really bites, isn't it?
Exactly. Because despite this apparent interest in talks, Iran hasn't really seemed to soften its core positions. Scaling back for Iran seems to mean keeping some level of these programs.
Which is just fundamentally at odds with the U.S. demand, right? Zero uranium enrichment, total degradation of ballistic missiles. It's two very different definitions of scaling back.
So how do we square that circle, this willingness to talk versus the unwavering stance?
Well, it really highlights this fundamental, almost irreconcilable disagreement. It makes any real breakthrough incredibly difficult. It's like they're speaking different languages in the same room. And you see this reflected in the reporting, too. You might get an unspecified U.S. official cited by Axios hinting at a nuanced opening, a bit of hope. But then you get Arab intermediaries talking to Western media, and they paint a much more rigid picture of Iran's position.
Like what specifically?
Well, for example, these intermediaries reported back on June 16th that Iranian officials are willing to de-escalate hostilities, which, sounds positive.
Okay.
But they're absolutely not prepared to make concessions on the nuclear talks, which implies that U.S. demand for zero enrichment on Iranian soil, still a complete non-starter for Tehran, a red line they just won't cross.
So it might be more tactical then. A way to ease pressure, maybe.
That's certainly a plausible reading, a tactical diplomatic move, maybe buying time rather than a genuine shift in their core policy. It's a huge obstacle, especially given the U.S. position.
And then, layered on top of this, you have the very public, very blunt rhetoric.
Mm.
President Trump's call for Iran's unconditional surrender on social media back on June 17th. How does that kind of language affect these, delicate back-channel efforts?
Oh, it absolutely affects them, and mostly it undermines them. It just hardens positions on both sides. You saw Supreme Leader Khamenei's response, didn't you?
Yeah, that televised speech on the 18th, categorically rejecting it.
Exactly. Categorically rejected. And coming directly from the Supreme Leader, televised like that, that's hugely significant. It's not just for domestic consumption. It's a clear message, internally and externally, that demand is an absolute non-starter, an insult, even.
So it doesn't exactly pave the way for compromise.
Quite the opposite. Public pronouncements like that rarely do. They tend to entrench the existing positions, make the path to negotiation even rockier. It just reinforces that massive gap between their stances, makes those whispers of back-channel talks seem even more fragile.
So you've got this quiet buzz of potential talks, maybe in Oman, maybe Geneva.
Hmm.
But then these loud public rejections and these deeply dug-in positions, it really makes you wonder about Iran's true motives here. Why signal interest in talks now,
It's the key question, isn't it?
given the pressure they're under? Is it just a play for time? Maybe to advance their nuclear program further or shore up internal support? Or is there a genuine desire for a deal, but only, absolutely only, on their terms?
Well, all of those are possible, and it's probably a mix. Tehran's making a really complex calculation here. They're weighing the immense costs of this conflict, economic, human, against what they see as the unacceptable concessions needed for a diplomatic way out.
So buying time could mean advancing nuclear leverage.
Or just weathering the storm, dealing with internal dissent. If it is a genuine desire for a deal, it's likely one they feel they can negotiate from a position of relative strength, not weakness. They'd expect the U.S. to shift significantly.
And the pressure is very real, as you said,
Hmm?
especially when you factor in the U.S. preparations for potential military strikes.
Exactly. That brings us to the other side of the coin, the looming military threat.
Right. Building on that pressure, let's pivot to that shadow hanging over everything potential U.S. military action. We're seeing reports, pretty specific ones, that the U.S. is actively preparing to support a potential strike on the Fordo fuel enrichment plant if Iran rejects U.S. conditions for getting back to nuclear talks.
And this isn't just vague talk, is it? Unspecified U.S. officials, cited by Western media on June 19th, reported that President Trump has actually approved attack plans for Iran. Approved them.
But holding off on the final decision.
Holding off, yes, to see if a deal can be reached first. But having approved plans in hand, that's a very significant escalation of the threat level.
And there are conditions attached to any potential strike, reportedly.
Yes, and they're crucial. Trump apparently wants assurances that any strike is absolutely necessary, that it won't lead to a protracted war, and this is key, that it will succeed in destroying the Iranian nuclear program.
Those are incredibly high bars.
They are. It suggests a deep awareness within the administration of the massive risks involved. You don't set conditions like that lightly.
And we're seeing physical moves, too, U.S. assets being repositioned.
Yes, the U.S. has started moving military assets to the Middle East in recent days. Explicitly, they say, to provide more options for defending U.S. assets and interests. This isn't subtle. Visible asset movement like that is a clear signal of intent, a show of force.
And there's even a timeline being mentioned.
Apparently so. U.S. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated Trump will decide on whether to strike Iran within the next 2 weeks. That puts immense pressure on the diplomatic track, doesn't it? Turns possibilities into potentially imminent realities.
Definitely raises the temperature. Now, Fordo itself, that's a particularly tough target, isn't it? Can you explain why, for listeners maybe not familiar with the details?
It is uniquely challenging. Fordo is built deep inside a mountain. It's a hardened underground facility. That makes it incredibly difficult to destroy, even with advanced bunker buster bombs designed precisely for targets like this.
So its strategic importance is really its resilience.
Exactly. It's built to withstand attack. In fact, there was a report, an unspecified U.S. official told Axios, that Israeli officials had previously indicated to the Trump administration that Israel might even need to attack Fordo with humans.
Meaning ground troops. Special forces.
That's the implication, yes, because Israeli air-launched munitions might simply not be powerful enough to destroy it from the air. That really highlights the unique, almost daunting challenge Fordo represents.
So targeting Fordo is a massive undertaking.
It is, and that's why it remains such a primary concern for anyone trying to neutralize Iran's nuclear capabilities. So when the U.S. starts moving assets into the region, it really does alter the dynamics. It's a powerful show of force, maybe a deterrent, or maybe a precursor to action.
So while this whole diplomatic chess game is playing out, with its bluffs and its quiet talks, and the U.S. is sort of holding its cards close,
Yeah.
the skies over Iran are telling a very different, much louder story. Israel hasn't been waiting. They've been relentlessly carrying out their own air campaign.
That's right. Highly active and seemingly escalating. And the sheer intensity, the deliberate precision of these strikes against key Iranian infrastructure, well, it speaks volumes about their immediate goals.
It really does seem systematic.
It does. The IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, have continued striking Iranian nuclear sites, military facilities, energy infrastructure, and if you look closely at the targets they're choosing, it reveals a very deliberate, very strategic approach. It suggests they have a deep understanding of Iran's capabilities and its vulnerabilities.
Let's start with the nuclear side, because that seems absolutely central. The Arak heavy water reactor in Markazi province was hit on June 19th. And the satellite images are pretty dramatic, aren't they?
They are. You can clearly see the dome of the reactor has collapsed. Nearby distillation towers, other infrastructure, also visibly damaged. It's a significant hit.
Now, Arak's importance is its potential for plutonium production, right?
Yeah, correct. It could produce plutonium as a byproduct, which is, of course, one pathway to a nuclear weapon. Now, this specific reactor was never fully operational, and Iran had actually agreed to redesign it under the 2015 nuclear deal to ease exactly these kinds of concerns.
So why hit it now if it wasn't operational and was meant to be redesigned?
Well, the IDF stated they struck it because of its potential to support plutonium-based weapons. It's interesting because Iran's more immediate focus has been on uranium enrichment. Hitting Arak suggests Israel is determined to block all potential paths to a bomb, even the ones not currently active.
Covering all bases, essentially.
Seems like it, and it's crucial to note the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, they confirmed the strike happened. But importantly, they also stated that no nuclear material was actually present at the facility.
Okay, so it was infrastructure damage, not a radiological risk.
Exactly, which is a critical distinction. Though an evacuation order was issued for the area around Arak, suggesting concern about the immediate conventional aftermath for locals, even without nuclear material involved.
So they're hitting potential future threats. But they're also hitting sites linked to Iran's past nuclear weapons efforts, aren't they? Like the Sanion site near Tehran.
Yes, and that's fascinating strategically. David Albright, the former UN weapons inspector, describes Sangerian as completely destroyed. This site was absolutely key in Iran's old pre-2003 nuclear weapons program, the Ahmad project.
What was its role back then?
It was used for high explosive tests, the kind you need to perfect the trigger mechanism for a nuclear warhead. And there were reports from the Institute for Science and International Security indicating increased activity there in late 2024. Maybe signs of renewed interest.
So destroying it sends a very particular message.
A profound one. It's not just about current capabilities, it's a psychological blow. It basically says, we know your secrets, we know your history, we see everything, and we will stop you from ever reviving this, even from the ashes of past attempts.
It signals deep intelligence, doesn't it?
Unparalleled intelligence, yes. And an unwavering, long-term commitment to dismantling any piece of a weapons program, no matter how old or buried. It gives you a glimpse into maybe broader strategic objectives than just dealing with the immediate threats.
And Natanz keeps getting hit too. A storage facility there in Esfahan province was struck recently. The IDF claimed it held equipment for nuclear weapons development.
Yes, Natanz has been a frequent target. Previous strikes there hit the underground enrichment facilities directly. So you see the pattern.
Yep.
Israel is systematically going after different parts of the program. Potential plutonium at Arak, historical weapons work at Sangerian, enrichment infrastructure at Natanz.
So what's the big picture message here? Hitting such a diverse range of sites, some even linked to programs that were supposedly shelved years ago.
It's a comprehensive message, almost like a public declaration of intent, really. Israel's stated goal is to degrade, destroy, and remove the threat of the Iranian nuclear program. By hitting all these different types of sites, they're showing a deep, almost surgical understanding of Iran's entire nuclear architecture, present and past.
Leaving no stone unturned.
Exactly. Trying to ensure that any conceivable path to a weapon, plutonium, uranium, maybe reviving old research, is systematically blocked. It suggests a strategy to dismantle not just current capabilities, but also the latent potential, the institutional know-how.
Okay, moving beyond the nuclear focus, Israel's also hitting Iran's conventional military capabilities, right?
Yeah.
And potentially leadership. We saw strikes on those Gadir over-the-horizon radars.
Yes, at least 6 Gadir radars across Iran have been hit. One near Shiraz was struck sometime between June 13th and 19th. These are really important systems for Iran.
Why specifically? What do they do?
They're crucial for air defense. They can detect aircraft way out, up to 1,100 kilometers away. So a radar near Shiraz could potentially see aircraft deep into Iraq. Hitting them is a direct effort to degrade Iran's ability to track incoming Israeli aircraft. It's about maintaining Israeli air superiority over Iran.
Blinding their eyes, essentially.
Precisely.
Yep.
Creating a tactical advantage, allowing Israeli planes to operate more freely with less risk. It's a classic move in any air campaign. Control the skies.
And missile infrastructure is also under attack.
Heavily. The IDF has conducted at least 20 strikes targeting surface-to-surface missile infrastructure. That includes launchers, support vehicles, the things Iran needs to actually fire its missiles.
Which are their main way of striking back at Israel.
Exactly. Geolocated imagery from June 19th showed an IRGC Aerospace Force facility hit near its Tehran headquarters. That's the branch responsible for the drones and missiles. An IRGC base in Karaj, Al Borz province, was also reportedly hit.
So the aim there is pretty clear.
Yeah, limit Iran's ability to retaliate, degrade their capacity to sustain this missile campaign, take away their punch.
Okay, now this next part, this feels like a really dramatic, maybe even startling escalation in Israel's stated aims. They're not just hitting military and nuclear targets anymore, they're hitting energy infrastructure and unbelievably openly talking about a decapitation campaign against Iran's supreme leader.
It is unprecedented, certainly in the public statements. It feels like crossing a major threshold in the conflict's rhetoric, and maybe its objectives, too.
Let's talk about the energy strikes first. A power plant in Karaj reportedly hit on June 19th.
Yes. And previous analyses have suggested that hitting critical energy infrastructure like this could significantly worsen Iran's already difficult energy situation. You could see widespread, frequent electricity shortages, outages.
And the thinking behind that is?
The strategic theory is that this kind of economic hardship, the disruption to daily life, could potentially trigger internal unrest, create pressure on the regime from within Iranian society, maybe forcing them to change course.
But the decapitation talk is something else entirely.
It really is. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz stated quite explicitly on June 19th that, and I'm quoting, preventing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's existence is now one of the objectives of the Israeli air campaign.
Preventing his existence, that's blunt.
Extremely. And it follows similar, equally audacious statements from Prime Minister Netanyahu since June 16th. Netanyahu even asserted that Khamenei's death would end the conflict.
Wow. And they've actually instructed the IDF to increase attacks on government targets.
Apparently so. Both Katz and Netanyahu instructed the IDF to increase the intensity of attacks on government targets, explicitly to eliminate threats and, quote, undermine the Ayatollah's regime.
What are the implications of such an overt strategy, targeting the head of state?
It moves far, far beyond just degrading military capabilities. This is explicit regime change language, targeting the supreme leader of a sovereign nation. The implications are just immense and incredibly risky.
How so?
Well, on one hand, it signals Israel views Khamenei as the absolute core of the threat, believing his removal could fundamentally change everything, maybe even lead to the regime collapse.
Oh, the risks.
Enormous. It could provoke an even more extreme, unpredictable response from Iran and its proxies. They'd likely see it as an existential threat. Ironically, it might even unite Iranians against an external aggressor rather than fracturing society. It could completely backfire on the goal of creating internal unrest. It's a very, very high-stakes gamble.
And that leads us perfectly into looking at Iran's response. Because despite this intense Israeli air campaign, despite Israel claiming they've destroyed maybe half or even two-thirds of Iran's missile launchers, Iran has kept firing ballistic missiles at Israel.
They have. It shows remarkable resilience, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
As of June 19th, CTP-ISW, that's the Critical Threats Project and Institute for the Study of War Group, they'd recorded 43 impacts. either Iranian missiles hitting or Israeli interceptors engaging them.
And even with the IDF claiming significant success against launchers, Iran's ability to keep firing persists. What does that tell us?
Well, it suggests either their missile infrastructure is incredibly well dispersed, maybe lots of mobile launchers, hidden sites, or they simply started with a massive arsenal that can absorb these hits and still keep going.
Or both, perhaps. And significantly, the size of the Iranian missile barrages actually went up on June 19th. One barrage had around 30 missiles. That's the largest we'd seen since June 16th.
So they're not just continuing, they're escalating their response.
That's what it looks like. It shows they're not backing down, they're willing to take the hits and still hit back, maybe even harder.
And they're using more advanced missiles now, too. We saw the first use of a Sanion missile on June 18th.
That's right, the Sejal. It's a two-stage, solid-fueled, medium-range ballistic missile. Ranges about 2,000 kilometers. Now, it was successfully intercepted, which is important.
But what's the significance of deploying a new type like that?
The key thing about the Sejal is the solid fuel. Solid-fueled missiles are much quicker to prepare and launch compared to older liquid-fueled ones. That drastically cuts down the warning time for air defenses, makes interception harder, increases the threat.
And then there was the Khorramshahr 4 launch on the 19th with a cluster munition warhead.
Yes, and that represents a particularly dangerous, frankly, alarming escalation. That warhead released 20 small, 2.5-kilogram explosive submunitions at an altitude of about 7 kilometers.
Designed to spread the damage.
Exactly. The idea is to increase the impact area, boost potential casualties, maybe overwhelm air defenses by scattering targets. Now, in this case, apparently one submunition hit a home in Azor, thankfully, without causing injury, and the other 19 failed to detonate and were destroyed.
A testament to Israeli defenses, maybe, or luck?
Perhaps a bit of both, and maybe issues with the munition itself. But the intent behind using a cluster munition is clear. It's designed to inflict broader harm across a wider area. It's a nasty escalation.
And what were the actual impacts on the ground in Israel from these recent missile strikes?
Well, they hit several civilian locations. Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba was struck. It had been evacuated, thankfully, so no injuries there. Iran later claimed they were aiming for an intelligence HQ next door, but the hospital took the hit.
Anywhere else?
Yes, shops and apartments were damaged in Ramat Gan near Tel Aviv. Apartment buildings were hit in Holon, also near Tel Aviv. These are densely populated areas. The Israeli Health Ministry reported 220 minor injuries and 20 more serious ones from these latest attacks.
So casualties are starting to mount again.
Yes, these were the first injuries reported from Iranian strikes since June 15th. It underscores the escalating human cost and the danger of these barrages.
What about the drones? Iran's been launching a lot of those, too. How are Israeli defenses coping with that threat?
Remarkably well, actually. The Israeli Air Force and Navy have shown a very high success rate. They've intercepted over 95% of the Iranian drones aimed at Israel.
Over 95%. That's impressive.
It really is. Out of roughly 1,000 drones launched since June 12th, something like 480 have been shot down. Only about 200 even made it into Israeli airspace. It shows Israel has a robust, layered air defense system that's proving highly effective against this particular type of threat.
So the drone threat, while persistent, seems largely managed.
Largely neutralized before causing significant damage, yes.
Now let's turn to the internal shifts inside Iran.
Right.
These seem incredibly important, especially with Israel talking about decapitation and putting pressure on the regime.
Yeah.
We've seen some very rapid changes in key military commands.
Absolutely, and these appointments are highly telling, I think. On June 19th, Supreme Leader Khamenei appointed Brigadier General Mohammad Karami as the commander of the IRGC ground forces.
And Karami's background is significant.
Very significant. He has decades of experience specifically in internal security and counterinsurgency. He played a key role in suppressing the big protests in November 2019, and then again during the Masa Amini protests that started in September 2022.
So he's known for cracking down on dissent.
Exactly. He's actually sanctioned by the US, EU, UK, and Canada for precisely that role. And his appointment comes after this incredibly fast turnover. Remember, the previous IRGC commander, Salami, was killed by the IDF on June 12th. He was replaced by Pakpour, who was then almost immediately replaced by this guy, Karami.
So is this just musical chairs because of the IDF strikes, or is there something more strategic about appointing Karami?
It seems like both. It's partly a direct response, needing to maintain command continuity after losing key figures. But appointing Karami, with his specific background in brutally putting down internal dissent, that might reflect some very real, maybe growing concerns within the leadership about potential unrest inside Iran.
especially given the potential impact of those energy strikes we talked about earlier.
Precisely. If strikes worsen the energy crisis, leading to blackouts and hardship, that could fuel domestic discontent. Appointing a hardliner known for suppression suggests Khamenei might be prioritizing internal stability and control right now, perhaps even over external operations. It suggests the regime is, battening down the hatches at home.
And there was another key appointment, too, wasn't there, in IRGC intelligence?
Yes. The IRGC Commander, Pakpor, appointed Brigadier General Majid Kademi as the chief of the IRGC intelligence organization on June 19th. That came just days after Israeli airstrikes killed the previous chief, Mohammad Ghazemi, and his deputy on June 15th.
So again, rapid replacement after Israeli strikes.
It demonstrates Iran's determination to maintain command and control within its absolutely critical security apparatus, even while under direct attack, under this decapitation pressure. They're showing resilience in their command structure.
So taken together, these appointments might signal a subtle but important shift. Maybe less focus on external projection, more on internal consolidation, managing potential dissent. Suggests the regime feels the heat from within, maybe as much as from Israel.
That's a very sharp observation. I think it's a strong possibility. While they're obviously still fighting externally, the leadership seems keenly aware of and actively preparing for internal instability. It's a subtle but potentially significant sign of the pressure they're really feeling.
Okay, let's zoom out now, look at the wider region, particularly Iran's network of proxies, the so-called axis of resistance. Because the threats coming from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, for instance, are incredibly serious. They're warning of major escalation if the U.S. gets dragged deeper into this.
They are, and the threats are explicit, potentially catastrophic. Kataib Hezbollah's spokesperson, Abu Ali al-Askari, warned on June 19th. He said U.S. participation would trigger widespread attacks on U.S. bases across the region.
That's expected, maybe. But he said more, didn't he?
Much more. He threatened the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab al-Mandab Strait, and ports in the Red Sea. He also boasted Iran could keep firing missiles at Israel for a year and target the entire American presence in West Asia. This is not just posturing.
Closing those waterways. Hormuz, Bab al-Mandab. That's globally significant. Huge amounts of oil and trade pass through there.
Absolutely critical choke points. Closing them would have immediate, profound, cascading consequences for the global economy. Energy prices, supply chains. It would escalate the conflict instantly to a global scale.
And is this just rhetoric from the militias, or is there more behind it?
Well, according to U.S. officials speaking to the New York Times on June 17th, U.S. intelligence indicates Iran has prepared missiles and equipment specifically to strike U.S. bases if the U.S. joins Israel's campaign.
So intelligence backs up the threat.
It seems so. The same official said the Houthis in Yemen would almost certainly resume attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, and Iran might even lay mines in the Strait of Hormuz if the U.S. gets involved. This suggests it's not just loose talk from proxies. It looks like a coordinated, pre-planned escalation strategy across the axis of resistance.
And these groups are also reacting very strongly to the talk about targeting Khamenei.
Very strongly. That appears to be an absolute red line for them. Askari from Kataib Hezbollah, Akram al-Kabi from Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba. They both condemned Trump's recent comments about Khamenei being an easy target, even though Trump denied immediate plans.
And Kabi made specific threats.
He did. On June 19th, he explicitly threatened to target U.S. citizens, soldiers, diplomats, and any direct or indirect interest if Israel or the U.S. actually targets Khamenei. Another group, Saraya al-Dam, made similar unspecified threats if the conflict continues.
So the message is clear. Targeting Khamenei personally triggers massive retaliation against U.S. interests, regardless of direct U.S. involvement in that specific act.
That seems to be the message. They see the U.S. as complicit, as enabling Israel. So any attack on the supreme leader would likely unleash the entire axis against U.S. targets across the board. It's a critical threshold.
What about airspace issues? The Houthis and Iraqi militias are making demands there too?
Yes, adding another layer of potential friction. The Houthi leader, Abdulmalik al-Houthi, vowed on June 19th to keep attacking Israel, but also called on Arab countries, specifically including Iraq, to prevent Israel from using their airspace to fly towards Iran.
And the Iraqi militias echoed that.
They did. Ali al-Asadi from Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba's political bureau called on the Iraqi government to declare Iraqi airspace a no-fly zone for the U.S. and Israel, and even to target any Israeli planes or missiles entering it.
That would make Iraqi airspace a contested zone.
Absolutely, and it helps explain why these Iran-backed militias in Iraq have been trying to get their hands on air defense systems for years. They want the capability to actually enforce such a no-fly zone, which would totally change regional flight dynamics and power projection.
Finally, how is Israel's air campaign impacting Iran's ability to actually supply these proxies, like Hezbollah in Lebanon? Are the strikes degrading that crucial supply chain?
That seems to be a key secondary objective, and yes, it appears to be having an effect. Israel struck a site in Vandar, which is in Ghazvin province, on June 18th. This specific site was reportedly used by Iran to produce anti-tank guided missiles, ATGMs.
Missiles specifically for Hezbollah and other groups.
Exactly. For Lebanese Hezbollah and other axis of resistance groups, the IDF announced the strike but didn't initially say where it was, highlighting the sensitivity. But hitting a production facility like that directly impacts the material support flowing from Iran to its proxies.
So it weakens them indirectly.
It aims to degrade their capabilities, their ability to rearm and sustain operations. So, yes, the Israeli air campaign likely has this significant secondary effect of weakening the proxy groups that rely so heavily on Iran for weapons and money.
Even though Hezbollah's leadership has publicly reaffirmed support for Iran?
Yes, Hezbollah's Secretary General, Naim Qassem, confirmed their unwavering support for Iran in this war. The political alignment remains strong. But targeting these supply lines, the production facilities, that's bound to challenge their operational capacity over the long term. It hits their material strength. Hashtag, hashtag, Sotra.
So, after all that, what does it all mean? We've covered a huge amount of ground here. This whirlwind of activity, the diplomatic moves, the threats, the intense military back and forth, the shifts inside Iran. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But if we try to connect all those threads, step back and see the bigger picture, it seems clear that despite some talk about negotiation, neither side has really softened its core demands, has it?
Doesn't look like it.
No. Israel is pushing ahead with this really aggressive campaign, trying to degrade Iran's nuclear potential, cripple its military, and now, remarkably, openly targeting its leadership. Iran is hitting back with more sophisticated missiles, showing resilience. But they're also clearly reorganizing internally, appointing hardliners focused on domestic security. That signals real concern about their own stability, perhaps fueled by those energy strikes and the broader pressure.
And the regional proxies are just waiting in the wings.
Poised to dramatically escalate if the U.S. steps in fully, threatening global choke points, U.S. bases. It paints a picture of a really volatile, multi-front scenario with potentially global consequences.
You can really see how incredibly complex and interconnected all these events are. It's definitely not just about one missile launch or one airstrike, is it? It's this deep strategic dance with unbelievably high stakes.
Every move matters, on the battlefield, in diplomacy, even internal appointments. It all has ripple effects across the region and honestly far beyond.
Which leads to maybe a final unsettling thought.
Yeah. As these lines keep blurring between military action, political maneuvering, internal stability concerns, where does that threshold for irreversible escalation actually lie? The point of no return.
And what role could mistakes play? Unintended consequences, miscalculations, in deciding where this all goes.
Exactly. What role might those unintended consequences play in charting the future course of this already incredibly dangerous conflict?
That is definitely something for all of us to ponder as this continues to unfold. We really hope this exploration today has given you a clearer, more informed perspective on what's happening. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise and get straight to the essential insights from the sources you share with us. Today we're taking a deep dive into a topic that, well, it feels incredibly complex from the outside, but with the right guides, it becomes incredibly clear. The Iranian armed forces. Forget what you think you know about a typical country's military. Iran's setup is truly unique. It's a system purpose-built for very specific strategic objectives.
Indeed. Yeah. Our mission today is really to build a common understanding of this intricate structure, the diverse functions, and the pivotal roles that all these different entities within the Iranian armed forces play, particularly, I think, in ensuring regime security. This isn't just about tanks and planes. It's about understanding a system tailored, really, to political survival and projecting that revolutionary ideology.
Right. And we're pulling from a fantastic explainer from the Institute for the Study of War, specifically their June 2025 piece, Explainer, the Iranian Armed Forces.
Mm.
Think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to truly grasping the nuances of a critical global player. You're going to uncover some surprising facts, I think, and gain a perspective that goes far beyond the headline. So let's unpack this. Okay, first section. The apex of power, command and control. At the very top of Iran's armed forces sits Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Now, what's the true nature and extent of his authority over the military? It's far more than just a ceremonial role, isn't it?
Oh, far, far from it. Khamenei is the undisputed commander-in-chief. He holds absolute authority over every single aspect of Iran's military and security apparatus. His position places him directly atop the entire hierarchy, completely bypassing any kind of traditional civilian chain of command you might see in, well, in most nations.
Right.
And for decades now, his strategic orientation, his focus, has been laser focused on two key interconnected objectives. First, the preservation and continuity of his regime, ensuring its survival against all perceived threats, internal and external. That's paramount.
Okay.
Second, the export of his revolutionary ideology. That's a cornerstone of the Islamic Republic's foreign policy and regional influence. It drives so much of their external engagement. And he has meticulously, really meticulously developed the armed forces to directly support these functions, making sure every element, every doctrine, every deployment aligns with his singular vision. What's truly fascinating here, and unique compared to many state militaries, is how his work deeply entrenched this unwavering loyalty and subservience to him, the supreme leader, within the Iranian military culture itself. This isn't just, professional duty or patriotism. It's about ideological allegiance. A profound fealty, really, that binds the military to the clerical establishment and to Khamenei personally. This principle, it just permeates everything from training to doctrine. Loyalty is foundational.
And that's such a stark contrast, like you said, to many nations where you have a clear civilian chain, maybe involving the president or defense minister.
Yeah.
What about them in Iran? Where do they fit in, if at all, given Khamenei's absolute authority?
Exactly. That's the key point. The president and their defense minister are explicitly nowhere in the direct military chain of command. Not when it comes to operational control or war-fighting decisions. Now, they certainly influence Iranian security policy, sure. They have access to Khamenei, they're part of his inner circle of advisors, and they hold positions, ex officio on the Supreme National Security Council, which is a high-level consultative body. But their direct involvement in actual military operations, the day-to-day direction of forces, minimal.
So it really highlights where the power is.
Precisely. This structure clearly shows the true power resides solely with the supreme leader. It's also worth noting the Defense and Armed Forces Logistics Ministry. This ministry handles the practical side, the administrative stuff, the military-industrial base, buying arms, equipment, even arms sales. But it is entirely separate from operational command. It has no authority to direct troops.
Got it. Logistics, not command.
Exactly. It reinforces the Supreme Leader's singular direct authority over everything that matters strategically, deployment, objectives, actions. The civilian government handles the supply chain, but not the trigger.
So while a formal hierarchy does exist below the supreme leader, the source emphasizes that these informal influence networks, interpersonal relationships, they play similarly prominent roles.
Yeah.
Almost on par with the official chart. And this can lead to some interesting dynamics, right? Like Khamenei sometimes issuing orders directly to service chiefs, just completely bypassing the established channels. What does that imply for operations? Sounds like it could be efficient sometimes, but maybe opaque, unpredictable.
Oh, this dynamic is absolutely crucial. And it reveals a deep layer of complexity. It suggests that while there are protocols, a formal chain on paper, the ultimate authority, the supreme leader, can, and often does, bypass them entirely. And this isn't just occasionally. It's kind of ingrained in how decisions get made, especially on critical issues. It reflects a system where personal loyalty, direct relationships, closeness to Khamenei can, and often do, override formal protocols.
So loyalty trumps the org chart sometimes.
Pretty much. For example, a trusted general might get direct instructions that filter down through this informal network, even while the formal hierarchy technically exists. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it points to a highly centralized, personality-driven command structure. It prioritizes direct ideological alignment and personal trust over strict adherence to rigid organizational charts.
And the pros and cons of that.
Well, this kind of system can be incredibly agile in certain situations, right? Rapid decisions straight from the top, especially in a crisis. But it can also be very opaque from an external perspective. Makes it hard for outsiders to predict actions or understand the full reasoning behind military decisions because the real lines of communication aren't always visible. So, for you, the listener, it means understanding that influence and command in Iran isn't always about titles on a chart. It's often about who has that direct access, that strong personal rapport with the supreme leader. This informal layer adds an unpredictable yet powerful element.
Okay, beneath the supreme leader, you mentioned the forces have three main branches. We'll get to those, but they're commanded, controlled, coordinated by two crucial entities: the Armed Forces General Staffs, or AFGS, and the Khantam Old Ambia Central Headquarters. What are their distinct roles? How do they interact in this unique framework?
Right. These two bodies are basically the strategic brains of the Iranian military. They operate directly under Khamenei, bridging that gap between his grand strategy and the tactical execution. The AFGS is responsible for strategic guidance, military policy. It functions most closely to what the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff does, long-term planning. It shapes the overall direction, doctrine, the strategic vision for all branches, ensuring it all aligns with Khamenei's objectives. It's the what and why of strategy.
Okay, the big picture planners.
Exactly. Then the Khatam Ol Andia Central Headquarters is a parallel organization, but its role is distinct yet critically complementary. It's specifically responsible for joint and wartime operations, so it takes that strategic guidance from the AFGS and translates it into operational plans. It directly coordinates the actions of all branches, Artesh, IRGC, even the LEC during actual conflicts, big exercises, or major crises. This body is about the how of military action. It's the central orchestrator.
Interesting. A dedicated wartime HQ.
Yes, and this raises an important point for those familiar with Western militaries. The U.S. has no direct equivalent to this central headquarters in its operational chain. Our chain runs from the Secretary of Defense to geographic and functional commands, not one unified command for all wartime ops. This unique Iranian structure allows for highly centralized, single point operational control during conflict. Theoretically, it streamlines decision making and coordination across their diverse forces in a crisis, makes them potentially very decisive in tense moments.
And here's where it gets, well, really interesting, especially given that personalized hierarchy we just talked about. The source notes recent Israeli strikes killed Major General Mohammad Bagheri and Major General Gholam Ali Rashid, the heads of the AFGS and Khatam Al Central Headquarters, respectively. That must cause disruption, right? What could be the implications of losing leaders at such critical command points, especially when so much hinges on individuals and their knowledge?
Yeah, this is a significant point. It's difficult to overstate the potential impact. Losing figures that senior, especially the heads of AFGS and Khatam Olandia, isn't just about swapping names on a chart. These individuals represent decades of institutional knowledge, a deep understanding of Iranian doctrine and strategy, and crucially, those established relationships within those complex informal networks we discussed. They're the linchpins of coordination.
So disruption is inevitable.
Absolutely. The immediate implication is disruption. This could show up in several ways. A temporary hit to the speed and effectiveness of decision making, particularly in crises needing rapid response. You could also see friction or maybe some disarray in coordination between the different branches, which rely on these HQs for unified direction, and maybe a temporary slowdown in overall operational planning as new leaders find their feet.
And longer term.
Well, beyond the immediate, there's the long-term impact. Depending on who replaces them, how quickly they establish authority and integrate into the networks, it could even subtly influence strategic directions. New leaders bring their own style, their own priorities. It really highlights the vulnerability of these highly centralized, personality-driven command structures to targeted strikes. Removing key individuals creates a significant void. Takes time and effort to fill, could impact the whole system's cohesion, especially during critical periods. For you, the listener, it's understanding these losses aren't just headlines. They're a tangible challenge to Iran's strategic continuity.
Okay, let's shift to how Iran sees the world. Section 2. Iran's threat perception. It's fascinating how a nation's military really reflects how it perceives threats. The Iranian armed forces identify three distinct kinds of security challenges in their doctrine: hard, quasi-hard, and soft threats. Can you break these down? Because they paint a very telling picture, don't they?
Absolutely. This unique threat doctrine is foundational. You really have to grasp this to understand their force structure, their priorities, the roles of their various organizations. It's not just about military defense, it's a much broader, all encompassing concept of national security.
Okay, so first, hard threats. That sounds conventional.
It is. Hard threats are what you'd typically expect, explicitly military in nature. using force to achieve military effects, political outcomes. Think conventional warfare, large-scale kinetic action, direct military aggression from outside, state-on-state conflict. Iran's history, especially the Iran-Iraq War, deeply ingrained the seriousness of these conventional challenges.
Got it. And quasi-hard threats, that sounds less defined.
It is more abstract and critically, often internally focused, maybe with external instigation. These refer generally to domestic security problems threatening the regime from within or through unconventional means. It's a broad category. Clandestine operations by adversaries or internal dissidents, cyber operations against critical infrastructure or for spying, insurgent activity, and very importantly, violent protests.
Violent protests explicitly included. That's significant.
Highly significant, especially since the 2009 Green Movement and later waves. It points to a persistent concern about internal stability, the regime's struggle against domestic opposition. Mass demonstrations, particularly over economic or social issues, aren't just seen as civil disorder but as a direct challenge to regime survival, warranting a military or paramilitary response.
Okay, and finally, soft threats. This sounds the most unique.
It is, perhaps the most uniquely Iranian in definition and emphasis. Soft threats refer to sociocultural trends. What the regime perceives as the corruption of Iranian society by Western values, liberal ideas. This truly speaks to the ideological underpinnings of the Islamic Republic. They see cultural influence, dissenting ideas, even pop entertainment as a direct threat to their revolutionary identity and control. It's recognizing that challenges can come not just from armies or protests, but from the very fabric of society, exposure to alternative ideas.
And this justifies.
It justifies extensive censorship, ideological indoctrination efforts, even direct policing of social norms by entities like the Basij, crackdowns on dress codes, suppressing independent art that falls under this umbrella, defending national security from ideological subversion.
So the Iranian armed forces aren't just organized to fight conventional wars, but also to combat these domestic and even ideological threats. Why is organizing around all three kinds of threats so significant, so unusual compared to other nations? It points to a fundamentally different logic.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting and truly distinguishes Iran's doctrine. Most militaries globally are primarily structured, trained, equipped for external military threats, Iran's hard threats, defending borders, projecting power, conventional war. Iran's explicit inclusion of quasi-hard and soft threats as core doctrinal challenges means a significant, maybe even pervasive portion of their military and security apparatus is inherently designed for internal control and ideological enforcement, not just external defense.
So it's a defense of the regime from within, as much as from without.
Exactly. Against dissent, cultural infiltration, ideological challenges. It necessitates a highly pervasive security presence throughout society, blurring lines between military, policing, ideology. We'll definitely see this when we discuss the unique branches, especially the IRGC and its organs like the Basid, deeply embedded in civil society. This unique framework means resources, training, strategic attention are diverted from purely external defense towards internal policing and ideological warfare. For you, the listener, it means understanding that when Iran talks security, it's much broader than just borders. It extends to safeguarding the ideological foundation, the internal stability of the Islamic Republic itself. Regime survival is national security.
Okay, that brings us perfectly to Section 3, the dual pillars.
Yeah.
Artesh versus the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the IRGC. This is one of the most defining characteristics, isn't it? Having two distinct, parallel, major military organizations. Let's start with the Artesh. What's its origin and primary role today?
Right, the Artesh. It's Iran's conventional military. Its history is rooted pre-revolution. It was the Shah's imperial army. That's why it's often called the regular Iranian military in the West. Importantly, it's considered less ideological than the IRGC. Its identity is more like a traditional national army, focused on professional soldiering, not revolutionary zeal. Its core missions are primarily defensive, repel foreign attack, preserve territorial integrity, maintain sovereignty. The Artesh holds most of the manpower and conventional platforms, tanks, helicopters, aircraft like the old F-4s and MiGs, major ships, submarines. It's the force you'd picture as a country's standard Army, Navy, Air Force.
But despite having all that hardware, the source points out a major challenge for the Artesh, one that really impacts its capabilities and how Iran projects power. What are these limitations? What's the practical effect?
Yes, a crucial point, a direct consequence of decades of geopolitical isolation. While the Artesh has a lot of platforms, years of comprehensive international sanctions have severely hampered its ability to maintain and modernize them effectively. So much of their equipment is aging. They rely on reverse engineering, maybe gray market parts.
We
It's
do a
hard to
little
replace.
trolling. It's
Their
called we do a
platforms are
little trolling.
considerably less capable than potential adversaries like the US or Israel, who operate far more advanced systems.
So it's not just a challenge, it's a strategic driver.
Absolutely. It's effectively forced Iran to be innovative elsewhere, particularly in developing asymmetric capabilities and relying heavily on other elements, primarily the IRGC, to project power. So, while the Artesh provides a necessary conventional deterrent, its capacity for modern high intensity conventional warfare is severely constrained by these sanctions. It leads to a de emphasis on traditional warfare and emphasis on adaptation.
Okay, now for the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, established by Khomeini right after the revolution as a parallel military. How did it begin and how has it evolved into such a pervasive, powerful entity, extending way beyond traditional military functions?
The IRGC. Initially conceived in '79 as a deeply ideological Praetorian Guard, specifically tasked with ensuring the clergy kept control of the new revolutionary regime, its loyalty was directly, unequivocally to the supreme leader and the revolution. A revolutionary vanguard distinct from the more traditional, initially less trusted, Artesh, designed to protect the revolution from internal counter-revolutions and external threats.
And since then,
Since then, what's fascinating is how it has truly metastasized, grown exponentially in influence, scope. It's become one of the most dominant political, security, economic, and ideological actors in Iran. Its reach extends far beyond military functions into almost every aspect of Iranian society and governance. Militarily, it's now the primary body controlling Iran's sophisticated missile and drone arsenals, a cornerstone of their deterrence and offense, a critical asymmetric advantage. And crucially, it manages and supports the so-called axis of resistance, that sprawling network of proxy militias across the Middle East, extending Iran's influence without costly conventional involvement. So it evolved from a guard into this multifaceted, pervasive instrument of national power.
so we have the Artesh, conventional, defensive, less ideological, contrasted with the IRGC, deeply ideological, pervasive, focused on asymmetric power projection and internal control.
How do these two coexist, often sharing responsibilities? What does this duality mean for Iran's overall strategy? Does it ever create friction? This dual structure is absolutely key to understanding Iran's strategic depth, its unique approach. And yes, it definitely creates fascinating dynamics, including friction. On one hand, the Artesh maintains that facade of conventional might, a deterrent against invasion, upholding territorial integrity, allows Iran to present as a state with a conventional army, even if hampered. On the other, the IRGC provides the ideological vanguard, the internal security apparatus suppressing dissent, and the primary means of projecting power asymmetrically proxies missiles.
But they both report to Khamenei.
Ultimately, yes. Both report to and serve the supreme leader, reinforcing his authority. But there are historical rivalries, ongoing bureaucratic battles, especially over resources, influence, even operational mandates. Think back to the Iran-Iraq War, there were instances of rivalry. Those dynamics continue, often behind the scenes. This internal competition can sometimes slow things down, lead to parallel efforts, look inefficient from outside.
But paradoxically, it's also a strength.
Paradoxically, yes. This duality also provides remarkable strategic flexibility. It allows Iran to adapt to that whole spectrum of threats, hard, quasi-hard, soft, and pursue objectives on multiple fronts simultaneously. Artesh handles traditional defense. IRGC is the ideological spearhead, managing proxies, ensuring internal control. It's a sophisticated division of labor, uniquely tailored to Iran's threat perception, where internal regime security is intertwined with external power projection. For you, the listener, it means when discussing Iran's military actions, you must differentiate which entity is at play. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to, well, cut through the noise and bring you the vital insights you need on the world's most critical events. And today we're really plunging into a conflict that feels like it's redefining global tensions. I mean, what does it truly mean when major powers are not just, trading blows, but actively targeting leadership and critical infrastructure? It's pretty intense. We're talking about explicit statements from Israel like preventing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's existence being an objective, or Iran launching advanced missiles, even using cluster munitions designed to scatter explosives. That's a different level. This isn't just about military might anymore, is it? It feels like shifting red lines, maybe an unprecedented level of direct engagement that really demands our close attention. And look, in a world just saturated with information, getting the full nuanced picture, especially when things are moving this fast, it's incredibly challenging. That's precisely why we're here.
Exactly. That's spot on. Our mission today is to take a proper deep dive into the latest and I think most intense developments in this Israel-Iran conflict. We're drawing directly from the comprehensive Iran Update Special Report from the Institute for the Study of War, specifically their June 19th morning and evening editions. And these aren't just, headlines scraped off the wire. These reports offer a remarkably granular, really detailed snapshot. They look at recent actions, the strategic calculations likely behind them, and crucially, their profound implications across the whole region. They give us that critical, on-the-ground detail: military strikes, subtle diplomatic signals, even those internal shifts within Iran's power structure. It's all in there.
Right, and our goal really is to help you understand the core drivers here. What's actually pushing this conflict forward? What are the surprising facts emerging? And ultimately, what's really at stake? We want to offer you a shortcut to being well informed without feeling, frankly, overwhelmed by just the sheer volume of information flying around. So we'll navigate the complex dance of diplomacy, the sheer intensity of these military campaigns, and those ripple effects that are already spreading across the entire Middle East. So as we start this deep dive, what's the single most striking element that jumps out at you right now, given how fast everything is changing?
That's a good question. I think what immediately stands out and what really underpins just how volatile this moment is, it's the incredibly precarious balance that Iran seems to be attempting to strike. On one hand, you see these, well, quite overt signals from Iranian officials expressing an interest in negotiating an end to this conflict. We've seen some concrete actions, too. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has reportedly been in direct contact with Iranian Foreign Affairs Minister Abbas Araki. That's significant. And there's even been the notable landing of two Iranian government planes in Oman. Oman, of course, has long been a crucial neutral mediator in the region.
A key backchannel location, yeah.
Absolutely. And Iraqi himself is apparently slated to meet with representatives from the UK, France, Germany, and the EU. The agenda, the nuclear issue, and the latest developments. So these are all, pretty significant diplomatic overtures that suggest a willingness to engage, maybe de-escalate.
But okay, here's the critical question, right? The thing that makes these signals so complex, it isn't just that they're talking, it's what they're talking about, or maybe what they're not talking about changing. Because these reports really emphasize that Iran has not moderated their negotiating positions from before the conflict. That seems like a crucial distinction. It's not just about showing up to the meeting, it's about what concessions you're willing to discuss, right? Or what you're absolutely refusing to concede.
Precisely. That's the core paradox here. You've got Arab intermediaries who often have, unique insights into Tehran's thinking, confirming that Iran is indeed willing to de-escalate hostilities, which, on the surface, sounds good, right? A step towards cooling things down regionally. However, these same intermediaries also state unequivocally that Iran is not prepared to make concessions on the nuclear talks themselves.
Ah, so there's the sticking point. De-escalate the fighting, but don't touch the nuclear program fundamentals.
Exactly. It points to this fundamental disconnect. Iran seems to want a reduction in the military tit for tat, but without compromising on those core nuclear issues. Issues central to their perceived national security, their prestige. Take, for example, the French Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, Jean-Noël Barrot. He recently said France is prepared to support negotiations to scale back Iran's programs. Now, you might hear a scale back and think, okay, that sounds like movement towards Western demands. But the nuance, as always, is absolutely critical here. This French position, when you look closely, actually aligns quite well with Iran's overarching objective, which is to maintain both its uranium enrichment and its ballistic missile programs, maybe at a reduced level, a scaled back level, but fundamentally maintain them.
Which directly clashes with what the U.S. has been demanding.
Directly, fundamentally contradicts stated U.S. objectives for zero uranium enrichment and a significant, verifiable degrading of Iran's advanced ballistic missile capabilities. So, yeah, while the diplomatic channels seem open, the foundational demands from both sides, well, they appear to be miles apart still.
So this leads us to a really vital question, one I expect many listening are asking. Are these negotiation signals from Iran actually genuine attempts at de-escalation? Could they lead somewhere stable? Or are they more strategic? A maneuver, maybe? A way to gain leverage, buy some time, project an image of diplomatic openness without making actual substantive compromises on those core issues, like enrichment, like the missiles. I mean, what does it truly mean for future dialogue if those fundamental demands from the U.S. and its allies remain completely unmet while Iran just maintains its rigid stance? It really feels like we're watching this high-stakes chess match where both players are declaring totally different endgames. Very different ideas of what winning even looks like.
You've absolutely hit on a critical point there, because while we're seeing these, let's call them diplomatic feelers, There's this stark, almost jarring contrast when you look at the military preparations
Yeah.
and the very firm demands coming from the U.S. side. The message from Washington seems unambiguous. Iranian proposals that do not fulfill U.S. demands for zero Iranian uranium enrichment will almost certainly preclude any new nuclear deal, full stop. And by extension, they'll also prevent a ceasefire in this broader escalating conflict. That's the firm line in the sand. U.S. President Donald Trump has even gone a step further, publicly calling for Iran's unconditional surrender.
Unconditional surrender. Wow, that's not language you hear often in diplomacy.
No, it's incredibly stark. And it's a demand that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, in a defiant televised speech, categorically rejected, flat out refused.
Well, that immediately sets up an impossible impasse, doesn't it? I mean, there's just no common ground between those two positions whatsoever. And the situation gets even more intense, doesn't it? Even more urgent when you factor in the next bit from these reports. The U.S. is reportedly preparing to support a potential strike. A strike on the Fordo fuel enrichment plant, specifically if Iran rejects these U.S. conditions. Apparently, Trump has approved attack plans, but crucially, he's holding off on a final decision. He wants to see if Iran accepts a deal first.
Right. His calculus, as reported, is clearly defined. He wants to ensure any strike is, quote, absolutely necessary, that it would not entangle the United States in a protracted war, which is obviously a huge concern, and critically, that it would succeed in destroying the Iranian nuclear program. That last one is an incredibly high bar for any military action, especially against a facility like Fordo.
A very high bar indeed, and the preparations are visible.
It seems so. The U.S. has already begun moving significant military assets to the Middle East in recent days. The stated reasons to provide more options should a strike become necessary, and also, presumably, to bolster the defense of existing U.S. assets and interests there. And adding to the urgency, U.S. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated quite plainly that President Trump will decide whether or not to strike Iran within the next 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay, that puts a very specific, very near-term deadline on a potentially massive military action. The pressure must be immense.
Immense. And what's particularly fascinating here, and really revealing of the immense difficulty involved in an operation like this, is the explicit mention of Israeli concerns about Fordo. An unnamed U.S. official, reported by Axios, apparently relayed that Israeli officials themselves told the Trump administration that Israel might have to, and this is a quote, attack Fordo with humans.
With humans? What does that even mean? Special forces on the ground?
That's the implication, yes. Because according to this report, Israeli munitions, even their most advanced bunker busters, may not be able to destroy Fordo effectively. Given its unique construction, how deep it is underground, heavily fortified within a mountain, it's an incredibly tough target. This detail truly underscores the extreme challenges, the incredibly high stakes of any potential strike on that specific critical facility. It's not just another target, it's a monumental challenge.
So the U.S. pressure is mounting, putting this very clear, time-sensitive ultimatum on the table. But at the same time, Israel is also very clearly defining its own objectives. And some of them are, as we touched on earlier, incredibly direct, maybe unprecedented, and frankly chilling. This takes us beyond just degrading military capabilities to something far more existential, a targeting approach that signals a really profound shift in their strategic goals.
That's absolutely right. And it marks a dramatic escalation in rhetoric and crucially stated intent. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz explicitly stated on June 19th that, and I quote again, preventing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's existence is now one of the Israeli air campaign's primary objectives. This isn't subtle. It's not diplomatic ambiguity. It's a direct public declaration of intent to target the absolute top of Iran's leadership.
Wow. That's quite something to say publicly.
It is. And this statement follows similar, though perhaps slightly less direct, sentiments from Prime Minister Netanyahu. Including his assertion that Khamenei's death would, in his view, effectively end the conflict.
Which is a huge assumption, but okay. So this truly represents a significant escalation then. Moving beyond the usual goals, degrading capabilities, hitting infrastructure to explicitly targeting the regime's leadership. And both Katz and Netanyahu have clearly told the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, to increase the intensity of attacks on government targets. The stated aims seem twofold. First, eliminate threats to Israel, standard military objective, fair enough. But the second one, arguably much more provocative, is to directly undermine the Ayatollah's regime.
Exactly. And that remark by Katz, It was made during a highly symbolic visit to an Iranian missile impact site in central Israel,
Yeah.
emphasizing that direct retaliation aspect, linking the targeting of leadership directly to Iran's ongoing missile barrages against Israel. It definitely ties into Israel's broader stated objectives since they launched this air campaign back on June 12th. Those objectives being, to degrade, destroy, and remove the threat of the Iranian nuclear program, and fundamentally to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's survival. It suggests a very ambitious, very comprehensive campaign.
So, what's truly fascinating here, and maybe critical for understanding the long-term implications,
Hmm.
how does this decapitation campaign, the strategy of targeting the very top leadership, how does that actually interact with those broader goals? Does directly targeting Khamenei and other senior figures really achieve the aims of degrading the nuclear program or rolling back the threat? Or does it risk something far more unpredictable, something destabilizing?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Historical precedent, even if we look outside the direct scope of this report, suggests that while such a campaign might create immediate disruption, maybe shock, it can often backfire. You risk inadvertently unifying a population against an external enemy. You might strengthen hardliners, not weaken them. Or worse, you could end up with a more radicalized, more entrenched successor regime. This strategy marks a significant departure from, let's say, conventional military objectives. It ventures explicitly into the realm of seeking regime change by force, at least in its declared intent. And that carries all the inherent risks that come with such a gamble.
Yeah, huge risks. Okay, so this brings us directly to the operational side of Israel's campaign, which, according to these reports, has been remarkably broad, deeply strategic, and really far reaching in its targeting. We're seeing strikes on sites that speak not only to Iran's current military strength, but also its past nuclear ambitions, and even hitting things like their energy infrastructure to create internal pressure.
Yes, starting on the critical nuclear front. Commercially available satellite imagery has unequivocally confirmed the IDF targeted the Sanion site in Tehran province. That was on June 18th. David Albright, he's a former UN weapons inspector, a very respected voice on nuclear proliferation, stated that Israeli strikes completely destroyed 4 buildings at Sanion. Now, this site holds immense historical and strategic significance. It was a key clandestine facility in Iran's pre-2003 Ahmad project.
That was their original covert nuclear weapons program, right?
That's the one. Specifically used for high explosive tests, the kind essential for developing a nuclear implosion device. And what's even more concerning, what makes this strike particularly potent, are earlier reports suggesting Iran had reportedly increased activity at Sangerian and other similar sites in late 2024. So this strike hits both a historical nerve and a potential future capability in Iran's nuclear weapons pathway.
And Sanjarian wasn't the only major nuclear-related site hit.
Not at all. The IDF also struck the Iraq heavy water reactor in Markazi province on June 19th. Again, satellite imagery clearly shows significant damage. The dome collapsed, distillation towers severely impacted. And this is incredibly crucial because heavy water reactors, unlike the more common light water reactors, are capable of producing plutonium. That's the other pathway to a nuclear weapon, besides highly enriched uranium. Now, Iran had agreed to redesign this facility under the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA, specifically to alleviate these plutonium proliferation concerns. So hitting it now signifies a return to open, direct confrontation on this specific, highly sensitive nuclear issue.
But was there active nuclear material there? That's always a major concern with strikes on reactors.
That's a critical detail, and thankfully the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, confirmed that there was no nuclear material at the facility when it was struck. So it suggests the strike was aimed squarely at the physical infrastructure designed to set back Iran's capacity, rather than targeting active, highly radioactive material, which would have been a catastrophe. However, the severity of the planned strike was undeniable. The IDF issued an explicit evacuation order around the Iraq reactor beforehand, signaling the immense destructive power they intended to use. Iran, for his part, did acknowledge that 2 projectiles hit the facility. And beyond these 2 major strikes, the IDF also reportedly struck a storage facility in Natanz, another site long associated with Iran's nuclear program, believed to contain equipment crucial for nuclear weapons development. So yeah, the targeting of Iran's nuclear backbone appears comprehensive and deeply strategic.
Okay, so beyond the nuclear sites, Israel's campaign has also systematically gone after Iran's conventional military infrastructure, especially its missile capabilities, which makes sense given the ongoing barrages.
Absolutely. The IDF reportedly conducted 20 strikes targeting surface-to-surface missile infrastructure alone. That includes launchers, command and control centers, support vehicles, the whole lot. They also struck an Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC Aerospace Force facility near its headquarters in Tehran. And remember, the IRGC Aerospace Force is the branch that oversees Iran's entire drone and missile arsenals. So hitting them near their HQ is significant. There was also a reported strike on an IRGC base in Karaj. But what's truly fascinating here, and it speaks volumes about Israel's strategic priorities for maintaining air superiority, is the repeated targeting of specific radar systems. We've seen at least 6 confirmed strikes since June 12th on these Gadir over-the-horizon radars. They're spread across various Iranian provinces.
Over-the-horizon radars, those are the really long-range ones.
Exactly. These aren't just any radars. These Gadir systems are crucial because they boast an impressive 1,100-kilometer detection range, which means they could theoretically detect aircraft taking off or flying as far west as central Iraq. So targeting them repeatedly is a direct, sustained effort to, quote, degrade Iranian air defense capabilities and maintain air superiority over Iran. Essentially, trying to blind Iran's long-range eyes.
Blinding their eyes. And the targeting goes even deeper, you mentioned, touching on civilian infrastructure.
Yes, with a clear strategic intent. The IDF reportedly struck a power plant in Karaj, Alborz province, on June 19th. Now, while this hits what is ostensibly civilian infrastructure, the aim seems deeply strategic, to worsen Iran's ongoing and already severe energy crisis. The Institute for the Study of War assesses that strikes like these could directly lead to widespread and frequent electricity shortages and outages across Iran.
Which raises a really important question. If the frustration, the discontent from worsening energy shortages could actually trigger internal unrest, does that connect directly to other things we're seeing, like those leadership changes focused on internal security you mentioned earlier?
It certainly suggests a potential link, doesn't it? A multi-pronged strategy, perhaps, to weaken the regime both militarily from the outside and internally through pressure on the population.
Okay, so as Israel presses this offensive, broad, direct, hitting critical nodes, Iran is far from backing down. In fact, quite the opposite. They seem to be demonstrating surprising resilience and maybe an evolving strategy in their counterattacks, which just adds another incredibly dangerous layer here.
That's a critical observation, absolutely. Despite the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, claiming to have destroyed between 1/2 and 2/3 of Iran's missile launchers, which is a truly significant figure if accurate Iran has continued its ballistic missile campaign with remarkable persistence. This is a crucial point of, well, contradiction or at least tension. The reported effectiveness of Israeli strikes on launchers seems somewhat belied by the sustained volume of Iranian launches we're still observing.
Right, the numbers don't quite seem to add up. Keep hitting launchers, but the missiles keep flying.
Precisely. The Critical Threats Project and ISW have recorded 43 reported or confirmed Iranian ballistic missile impacts or Israeli interceptor impacts just since June 12th. That's a lot. And what's even more telling is the observable trend. The barrages actually increased in size on June 19th, approximately 30 missiles launched in one single salvo. That marks the largest single barrage since June 16th, and followed a pattern of more frequent but smaller barrages on June 17th and 18th.
30 missiles in one go. That's striking. The sheer volume, the persistence, even after supposedly taking significant damage to their launch capabilities. It suggests either, well, a much, much larger initial arsenal than maybe people anticipated, allowing them to absorb these losses, or maybe a really rapid, maybe even surprising ability to reconstitute, to set up new launch sites very quickly.
It could be a combination of both. And while Israel's sophisticated air defense systems, like David's Sling and Arrow, reportedly intercepted all missiles in one recent barrage targeting northern Israel, which is a testament to their effectiveness impacts, still occurred in other areas. It indicates the sheer challenge of dealing with a saturation attack strategy. Even the best defenses can be overwhelmed by volume. This really speaks to the scale of Iran's capabilities and their sheer determination.
And it's not just the volume changing, is it? Iran is also apparently demonstrating new, more sophisticated capabilities, using more advanced weaponry. That signals a dangerous escalation in their tactical approach.
Yes, absolutely. For the first time in this conflict, on June 18th, Iran launched a Sejal ballistic missile. This is not just any missile. It's a 2-stage, solid-fueled, medium-range ballistic missile, an MRBM. It has an impressive maximum range, around 2,000 kilometers.
2,000 kilometers. That puts all of Israel easily within range, plus maybe parts of Southeast Europe or elsewhere.
Easily within range. Now, while this particular Sejal was successfully intercepted, its deployment signifies a clear decision by Iran to field more advanced missile types. It showcases their evolving and, frankly, formidable long-range strike capabilities. But perhaps even more concerning, truly alarming in its implications, on June 19th, Iran launched a Khorramshahr-4 ballistic missile. This is a liquid-fueled MRBM, also with about a 2,000-kilometer range. But the critical detail here, it contained a cluster munition warhead.
A cluster munition. Okay, that's a serious and highly concerning escalation. Cluster munitions, they release dozens, maybe hundreds of smaller bomblets over a wide area, right? That makes them inherently indiscriminate. Extremely dangerous for civilian populations because they cause widespread damage and often leave behind unexploded ordnance, posing a long-term threat.
Exactly. They are banned by many countries under an international convention, though neither Iran, Israel, nor the U.S. are signatories. In this specific instance, one of the submunitions from that Khorramshahr-4 strike did indeed hit a home in a town called Ezor near Tel Aviv. Thankfully, it caused no injuries. The remaining 19 submunitions reportedly failed to detonate and were safely destroyed. So, a fortunate outcome in this case.
Very fortunate. But the intent behind using such a weapon, that's crystal clear, isn't it? If we connect this to the bigger picture, deploying cluster munitions, even if they were largely ineffective this time, highlights Iran's willingness to use more indiscriminate, more dangerous weapons. It raises the stakes considerably, shows a clear intent maybe to inflict broader damage, terrorize civilians perhaps. It just underscores the rapidly escalating nature of this conflict and the increased potential for civilian casualties, even with sophisticated defenses trying to intercept them.
And the human impact of these missile attacks is becoming more pronounced, sadly. It's moving beyond just property damage now. An Iranian ballistic missile struck the Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba. It caused significant damage to the building. Fortunately, no injuries because the facility had been prudently evacuated days before.
Thank goodness for that foresight.
Indeed. Another missile struck Ramat Gan near Tel Aviv, causing damage to shops and apartments, disrupting civilian life. A third hit Holon, also south of Tel Aviv, damaging apartment buildings. But what's truly sobering is the cumulative human cost from these recent strikes. They critically injured 4 individuals, moderately injured 16, and caused minor injuries to 220 others, often from debris or shockwaves. This marks the first time Iranian strikes have inflicted physical injuries on people since June 15th. It signals a more direct, more devastating impact on civilian life and well-being.
Just awful. Okay, shifting focus slightly.
Beyond the direct military back and forth, there's this other fascinating layer unfolding inside Iran itself, significant leadership changes that seem to reveal a lot about the regime's priorities right now. It feels like even as they face intense external pressure, maintaining internal stability, internal control is an equally pressing concern for them, maybe even greater. Absolutely, this is a critical internal dynamic to watch. On June 19th, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei made a very, very telling appointment. Brigadier General Mohammad Karami was named the new IRGC Ground Forces Commander. Now, Karami replaced Mohammad Pakpour. Pakpour himself had only been in that top job for a few days. He was appointed right after the IDF killed the previous IRGC Ground Forces Commander, Hossein Salami, on June 12th.
So that's a rapid turnover at a very high level. Killed, replaced again within a week.
Extremely rapid. And this immediate replacement of killed commanders, often within days, it powerfully indicates the regime's unwavering determination. They want to maintain command and control, project stability, despite Israel's clear decapitation efforts aimed at sowing chaos in their ranks. But what's particularly noteworthy and concerning about this latest appointee, Karami, is his background. He has decades of extensive experience in internal security and counterinsurgency. His track record includes brutally suppressing major protests. Think back to the widespread November 2019 protests, the Masa Amini protests that started in September 2022. Karami was involved in cracking down on both, and for his role in these crackdowns, he is sanctioned by the U.S., the EU, the UK, and Canada.
Right. So Khamenei appointing someone like Karami, known specifically for his harsh effectiveness in internal suppression, that really might reflect the regime's deep, maybe escalating concerns about potential domestic unrest. It suggests a proactive, maybe preemptive measure, shoring up internal control, consolidating power, especially with this intense external military campaign happening, and the potential for widespread electricity shortages from those Israeli strikes we talked about.
It certainly seems plausible, yes. A move to ensure the lid stays on internally while dealing with the external fire.
Which leads us to a really important question for you, the listener, to consider. Is the regime prioritizing internal stability and dissent suppression above everything else right now, even as it faces this unprecedented external military campaign? And what does that mean for the Iranian people? Caught in the middle, increasingly, between these twin pressures, external conflict and internal repression.
And speaking of those caught in the middle, the ripple effects of this conflict, they extend far beyond the immediate borders of Iran and Israel. They directly engage what's known as the axis of resistance. These are the Iranian-backed groups scattered throughout the region: Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria. And they aren't just sitting back. They're making their intentions known, demonstrating their capabilities, and showing a clear willingness to escalate if this conflict broadens, especially if the U.S. gets involved.
We've seen some extremely stark threats coming out of Iraq, for example, from the Iranian-backed militias there. They keep warning of massive retaliation if the United States directly joins the Israel-Iran war. The Kataib Hezbollah spokesperson, Abu Ali al-Askari, issued a particularly chilling warning just on June 19th. He stated that U.S. participation would trigger widespread attacks on U.S. bases right across the region.
Right, and even more significantly maybe, for global trade and energy security, he threatened the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
The absolute critical choke point for global oil shipments.
Precisely. And the Bab al-Mandab Strait, that critical shipping lane connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, plus the closure of other ports in the Red Sea. These are not idle threats. They target critical global shipping lanes, absolutely vital to international trade, global energy supplies. And of course, they directly threaten the U.S. military presence across the Middle East.
And Askari went even further, didn't he? Making some pretty bold claims about their capabilities.
He did. He claimed, with remarkable confidence, that Iran possesses the capability to launch missiles at Israel at the same rate for a full year, and that they can effectively target the entire American presence in West Asia. Now, whether that's hyperbole or not is hard to say, but it's a bold claim, and it's backed up apparently by some concerning intelligence. U.S. officials reportedly have intelligence showing that Iran has indeed prepared missiles and other equipment specifically to strike U.S. bases across the region if the U.S. becomes more directly involved.
So the preparations are there, according to U.S. intelligence.
It seems so. Moreover, U.S. officials believe that the Houthis, another key component of this axis of resistance based in Yemen, would almost certainly resume their disruptive, dangerous attacks on Red Sea shipping. We saw that disrupt global trade significantly before, and that Iran itself could potentially lay mines in the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz. That would be a massive escalation. What's truly fascinating here, though, is the deeply interconnected nature of these regional actors and their perception of U.S. involvement. Askari and also Akram al-Kabi, the leader of another Iraqi militia, Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba, they both vocally condemned Trump's threat to target Khamenei, and Kabi specifically threatened to target U.S. citizens, soldiers, and diplomats if Khamenei is targeted.
So they're drawing a direct line between U.S. rhetoric or perceived U.S. backing for Israel and potential attacks on Americans.
Exactly. It highlights a crucial perception among these groups. They often operate under the belief, right or wrong, that the U.S. implicitly or explicitly approves of Israeli actions, which means they might target U.S. assets, U.S. personnel, even if the U.S. doesn't directly participate in an Israeli strike, simply because they view the U.S. as complicit. And adding to this, the Houthi Supreme Leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, has also publicly stated his forces will continue to attack Israel, further cementing this regional alignment, demonstrating a kind of united front.
And just quickly, there was also a secondary effect mentioned, right? Israel's campaign against Iran might also be weakening these proxies directly.
Yes, that's another layer. Geolocated imagery confirms Israel struck a site in Vandar, in Iran's Ghazvin province, on June 18th. This particular site was known to be used for producing anti-tank guided missiles, ATGMs. These are critical weapons supplied to Lebanese Hezbollah and other axis of resistance groups. So hitting this production facility is a direct, calculated measure to weaken these Iranian-backed proxies, who are highly reliant on Iran for resupplying their arsenals, maintaining their operational capabilities against Israel. And, in turn, Hezbollah's Deputy Secretary General, named Qasem, has confirmed his group's continued, unwavering support for Iran. It's all interconnected.
Okay. Wow, there is so much happening simultaneously. So let's try and pull this together. What does this all mean for you, our listener, for the broader world as we try to process these rapid, really high-stakes developments?
Indeed. It's a lot to take in. This deep dive into the latest ISW reports, it paints a vivid and, frankly, deeply concerning picture of this conflict. It's clearly a rapidly evolving, multifaceted situation. The implications aren't just regional, they're potentially global. We've seen this complex interplay, right? Stalled diplomacy on one side and the smaller, Iran signals openness to talks, but remains absolutely rigid on core demands like zero uranium enrichment.
Which clashes directly with those firm U.S. and Israeli red lines we discussed.
Exactly, leading to increasing pressure, the very real threat of further, maybe decisive military action. Underscored by that explicit mention of U.S. attack plans for the Fordo nuclear facility. That's hanging over everything.
And we've seen Israel's air campaign is, well, it's far more than just degrading military capabilities now. It's explicitly targeting the regime's leadership, those statements about Khamenei, and hitting crucial infrastructure, significant nuclear facilities like Arak and Sanjarian, critical missile sites, even power plants, all seemingly with the aim of maybe exacerbating Iran's energy crisis, possibly sowing internal dissent. Feels like a multi-pronged assault, applying pressure from every conceivable angle.
Yeah, multi-pronged is a good way to put it. And on the other side, Iran has demonstrated this remarkable, maybe surprising, resilience in its response. Despite significant reported damage to its missile launchers, it's continued its ballistic missile barrages with sustained volume. That's a key takeaway. We've also witnessed that dangerous escalation in sophistication, deploying advanced missiles like the Sigil, and, most alarmingly, using cluster munitions in the Khorramshahr 4. That signals a clear willingness to escalate the type of weaponry, risking wider, more indiscriminate destruction.
And internally, amidst all this external pressure, the Iranian regime is making these strategic, quite telling appointments, bringing in figures like Mohammad Karami, known specifically for ruthlessly suppressing protests. That really signals deep concerns about domestic unrest potentially brewing under the surface, especially with added pressure like energy shortages. It speaks volumes about where the regime's immediate priorities might lie, perhaps internal control over everything else.
Absolutely. And finally, those regional dimensions. They're undeniable and deeply concerning. The axis of resistance Iraqi militias, the Houthis issuing Syria-specific threats against U.S. assets, against critical international shipping lanes like Hormuz and Bab al-Mandab. It signals a clear willingness to escalate if the U.S. becomes more directly involved. And at the same time, Israel's targeting of things like ATGM production facilities, hitting that site in Vandar, highlights a strategic effort to weaken these very proxies. It just shows how every action has a ripple effect across the entire region, pulling in multiple actors, each with their own agenda.
It really is a truly high-stakes scenario unfolding, a precarious balance between intense military pressure, these firm diplomatic stalemates, and the incredibly volatile dynamics of these interconnected regional alliances. It genuinely feels like every single action, every statement has a ripple effect across the entire region, maybe even globally, and it carries with it the potential for unforeseen, incredibly serious consequences. So, as you consider this complex, rapidly shifting landscape, maybe think about this. How are these direct attacks on leadership, on critical infrastructure, combined with these explicit threats to international waterways and U.S. interests? How is this fundamentally reshaping our traditional understanding of warfare, especially in the 21st century? What new red lines are being drawn here? Or perhaps in this escalating conflict, what long established boundaries are being erased? And crucially, what does that mean for the delicate balance of global stability? We encourage you to continue following these developments with a critical eye. Always look for how these specific actions connect back to the broader strategic goals, the underlying motivations of all the parties involved. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, negotiations in the press, debates between people reading things on the news, quotes in newspapers or made in a moment or on a website, that there are much more complex things that are happening. Other conversations, the culmination of multiple
is not at $4444. Another important update, the State Department has added a crisis intake form, which can be found by clicking the banner on the top of travel.state.gov, which, once again, the magic of technology, there it is. The new aspect is that red banner at the top. Click on Israel and Iran departure info for U.S. citizens and follow the instructions for more information. U.S. citizens in Israel and the West Bank who would like to receive information on departure assistance should fill out the form that this website will take you to. This crisis intake.
My question is about...
And in that process, we saw our posture adjust in that framework. At the same time, as I mentioned before, during negotiations, things sometimes progress, things change. That's the whole point of negotiations and conversations, is that you signal that how long it is generally that you're willing to wait, but that you would know if someone is serious. And then again, it's not a static environment as you're moving forward through that time. At the same time, we've heard since then some very blunt comments by President Trump about President Putin. We also know that the parties themselves have met directly. And I think that that's also where we've landed at this point in comments from both the President and Secretary of State, that the only way this is going to end is for the two parties to meet and come to a conclusion and a decision and some kind of an agreement. That is where it is. And of course, we are always present. We remain concerned and issued comments a couple of days ago about the nature of what's happening in Ukraine and the death of an American. So we are there. We have been, of course, Ukraine's biggest supporter, and we continue to hope for and work with and observe the nature of how the conversations are going at this point between the two parties. And that, like every other negotiation, can change one way or another, but that's our posture at this point. Of course, America is still involved, and we're clearly making our presence, our caring about the situation known, and that's where we're at this point.
Point taken, Tom, but in light of today's comments, as I mentioned, Putin's comments, and also his press secretary said that now we have a strategic advantage, quote, why should we lose it? We're going to move forward. So
yes.
In light of those comments, why not calling them out for not being serious about the peace process?
Well, again, we're not in just a world where when we see something online that we are going to choose how we're going to respond as an individual. There are many different fronts always in every situation that we remain involved in. So it's not as simple as a single response to a single quote that came from a statement or something online. This is about dealing with certain situations in a complex manner. Only the president can make the decision about how to proceed. Only he knows all the elements about what's important and how we're going to make a difference. And that's where we have it. Is, as I term it, as I did a couple days ago, there is one guiding hand to the choices that we make, and that would include with Russia, Ukraine, and every conflict he's trying to stop.
All right. Yes.
No. We are going to move on here. Thank you, sir.
All right, to go back to Iran just for two questions.
Of course.
One, just for clarification, have any Americans been killed or injured in Iranian strikes so far?
You know, I don't think so. Is that? Do we have numbers, or is that something that we've been able to? Let's take that back and see where things stand at this point. I do know that the reports that I've seen are that there have been no American injuries or injuries of staff at embassies and consulates. But let's take that back. And again, I would caution, obviously, this is a shocking continuation of a war that affects many countries, and we'll get back to you with the latest that we have.
I suppose the flip side, thank you, we would appreciate an update. The flip
of course.
side would be if,
and again, just a reminder for people watching, when we say we're going to take it back, it means we get the answer and get it directly to the reporter, and then have it, and obviously in this case, as a fluid situation, we'll continue to watch it.
Thank you. And insofar as you're looking into it, if there are American citizens in Iran, which we haven't gotten an estimate of how many Americans might be in Iran,
sure.
if there are injuries or or deaths there, we would also be interested.
Well, yes, again, the messaging is for also Americans who are in Iran, and again, urging them to go to travel.state.gov, and we're certainly aware of them. Our task force is working on all of this for every American who is in that region, which provides a different dynamic for some, whether it is, of course, Israel, Iraq or Iran, et cetera. Wherever they may be in the Middle East, we're there for them.
Thank you. The other question is on diplomacy. So we understand the Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is in some sort of contact with the Iranians. How would you encourage us to think about that contact? Is that a prelude to negotiations? What's the nature of that of his engagement with the Iranians?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it at all, except there are things that we know, which is that there had been negotiations, that we had gotten Iran to the table. We'd been having those conversations, led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. And we know that the president, from his statement, which is, I think, worth noting again, because it's very specific in its nature, and also, I must say, when I saw it, very Trump-like in his statement, as a man who is serious about everything he addresses, but in this particular kind of way, when it's existential, life and death, that he genuinely, it's not posturing. He wants to have it be solved diplomatically. He knows it can be. He knows, based on what he's accomplished already in the past, and the nature of human beings, which in business you learn a lot about as well, but certainly in his governmental experience and as a leader. Again, he said, directly from the president, quote, based on the fact that there is a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks.
On that front, do you have an understanding of why there's now a 2-week window for diplomacy? Because at the same time, the White House said yesterday they understand it might be a couple of weeks before the Iranians achieve a nuclear weapon.
No, but he has his reasons, and he's the one who knows, and that is the specificity of his statement. And I'll leave it at that. All right?
Thank you.
Yes, sir, at the end here.
So on Ukraine, you said that...
Can you tell me your name and your outlet?
Oskar Górzyński, Polish press agency.
Go ahead.
So, you said that you're not going to react to a single quote from Russian officials, but over the past few weeks, Russia has made it pretty clear that they're not interested in real negotiations. They killed the U.S. citizen. They struck the Boeing office in Kiev, and the president has repeatedly threatened sanctions on Russia if that happens. So why no action yet? I mean, how does that show peace through strength?
Well, this is one of the reasons why we don't have negotiations in the press, debates between people reading things on the news, quotes in newspapers or made in a moment or on a website, that there are much more complex things that are happening. Other conversations, the culmination of multiple other negotiations with Iran is an example in one case, summits and negotiations with Russia and Ukraine, the parties themselves meeting. We've always said that we will not take, essentially for Russia, we're not going to listen to what they say, we're going to watch what they do. That remains true. But what you would do in this moment is not at issue. What matters are the people who've been involved for months now, dealing with the parties directly, the leaders of countries in the world, but the most powerful leader in the world right now, Donald Trump, who would likely know a little bit more about the nature of the situation than you or I, and I think you might have to agree that he may know more. So I think it's important to not second guess the president, and to not speculate, and to not presume that what he's doing is not in the process of peace, but in fact specifically in that track. And I'm wondering for Matt Lee, who's been studious with his phone, if you do have something you'd like to ask or add.
I actually do.
I'm surprised.
My question is about
Matt Lee of the Associated Press, for those of you who don't know him.
25,000.
The two people in the world. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
The 25. Of the 25,000, you said that you couldn't break it down.
That's correct.
How many were Israel, how many were West Bank, and how many were Iran.
That's right.
But is it correct that the only evacuation flight that has happened so far was the one for embassy staff and family members on Wednesday?
I will not characterize that or agree with you or not. I won't give you an answer to that. Sorry. It's one of those things we can't hear. In the days prior to this conflict, I might go back and forth with you, but I can't answer that.
Okay. Well, because there was a comment from the embassy spokesperson about so are you aware of when these people call? I assume they're calling the number that.
Yes, they are. I've called that number. I don't know if many of you have. You called that number? You can call that number, and you'll get someone from.
You don't go on to permanent hold.
No, they're busier now. After the briefing Tuesday, they're busier. So, but be persistent and do the form online. That's always a good idea.
So the 25,000 people who have reached out,
yes,
have reached out via that platform, either online or calling.
Correct.
And they, do you know how many of those 25,000 have then taken the information that they've been given or the guidance that they've been given, and then left?
There's data that I won't be sharing, and even in general, it's not data that I can share with you. The fact that we got the number from the team, I felt really excited about. Now you're making me feel like it's not so good. No, it is. It's a great number, but I will not break it down.
Okay.
I will not go into descriptions that highlight a situation or an environment within this region of conflict. I don't think it's wise.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, yes, sir. Back.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. Regional sources reported that Iran is using human shields to protect its military bases and forces. Same thing Hamas did in Gaza. This tactic has reportedly been employed in several areas, including Kermanshah city in Iranian Kurdistan. Do you have any information on this, and would you please be willing to comment?
What I can say, it's going to be brief. You won't necessarily like it, but I can say that we are aware of those reports, that the Iranian regime is using human shields to protect its military bases and forces, and I have nothing further for you at this time, but we are aware. Yes, sir.
Next.
Well, you have one more?
Yes, one more.
All right, and then we'll come directly to you. Yes, sir.
Danny Danon, Israel's representative to the United Nations, claimed that Iran has attempted to assassinate President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. He said today at the United Nations. Do you want to comment on it?
No, I would suggest you contact the ambassador, but I have no comment on that. Yes, sir. All right, now, yes.
Thank you, Tammy. To question one on Iran and the other one on Iraq. I'm sure you may have heard from the Iranian foreign minister, which he said that we are not coming back to the table unless the Israeli stops strikes on Iran. And they are not going to negotiate with the U.S. until the U.S. will stop Israeli to attack Iranian. Are you willing to broker a ceasefire if that helps you to make a deal with Iranian?
Obviously, I can't speculate on that. I'm not going to characterize what's happening now or the reaction by the President or the Secretary of State to what those negotiations might be. So you know that's a standard basis here, is we're not going to do that. But as you do know, of course, from the President's remarks, is that he still holds out the hope for negotiations. And there's also been a reinforcement that Iran and its proxy should not target U.S. interests or personnel, and if they do, the consequences will be dire. So we can reinforce that. And of course, the ultimate red line, which has been repeated constantly, because it's what the President sees as being the most important aspect, is that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That is not a negotiable dynamic.
And,
all right.
and
yes, sir.
another question on Iraq.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
Sorry.
No, we'll keep going here.
I have a non-Middle East question.
Yes.
We're getting reports that Japan has canceled the annual security talks known as 2+2 with Secretary Rubio and Defense Secretary Hegseth because of U.S. demands for them to increase their defense spending. Do you have any comment on this? And has Tokyo communicated with
No, I have
Washington?
no comment on that at this point. Thank you. Yes, ma'am?
Thank you. Tell me two questions, one on China and about the Iran and Israel war. It was reported that the Chinese cargo plane was headed to Iran. Has there been any detection of Chinese actions or cooperation to support Iran? Thank you.
Let's take that back, shall we? Get back to her with an answer on that. What is your next one, please?
One more question, please. Iran's nuclear weapons are threatening the entire world. If the United States intervenes in a war between Israel and Iran, do you think it will need support or cooperation from its allies?
Well, we've made very clear, I think there's, if anything is obvious to the world, it's that President Trump has demands regarding that situation. His concern is the fact that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. We know, of course, since October 7th, Israel remains in the posture of defending itself and the existential threat that is posed in that region by Iran. Our efforts clearly reflect the President's commitment to diplomacy first, to diplomacy being the thing that he believes will and can succeed, but he's also a pragmatic man. And this is why it's probably the most transparent leader globally right now, is making it clear publicly about his positions and when he would be willing to be making decisions about that. But we are always working with our allies and our partners. It's clear, and that will be also evident when the President and Secretary of State go to The Hague for the NATO meeting next week. All right, now go ahead in the back. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, Jamie, on Bangladesh. Given UN Human Rights Commission Chief Volker Turk concern over the banning of political parties in Bangladesh, also Human Rights Watch has accused the UNIS-led interim government for arbitrarily targeting Awami League supporters. Does the U.S. consider this violation of democratic principle and condemn these actions?
Obviously, when it comes to let's say, a White House reaction to what is occurring in another country, I would suggest you contact the White House. But for when it comes to Secretary of State and the State Department, let's take that back, and we'll get an answer for you in that regard. But what I can tell you about Bangladesh is that Deputy Secretary Landau met with Bangladesh National Security Advisor Rahman yesterday, I should say Wednesday, and discussed the interim government's efforts ahead of the national elections. They discussed the U.S.-Bangladesh relationship, including expanding trade and commercial ties. The United States is committed to working with Bangladesh to promote peace and stability in the region.
And I have a second short question on
All right.
same. What is the State Department response to the alleged fabricated charges against Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, the rise of mob killing and violence, and the imprisonment of individuals like 100 journalists without trial under this interim government? Will you condemn this and ask them to free them?
We will take that back, and I'll get you an answer as soon as we can get one for you. Yes, sir, in the middle here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tammy. The Turkish President Erdogan hosted the Armenian Prime Minister and his delegation in Istanbul today, and he mentioned that they talked regional issues, including the stability and peace in the Caucasian region and the problems or the issues between Turkey and Armenia. How do you follow these meetings?
Well, I've not spoken to the Secretary specifically about that particular instance, but I'm sure we will be able to get to you his opinion and the nature of how he's reacting. I would also suggest the White House as well for you for more information in that regard. But if we can take that back. And with that, that is going to be it for me today. It is, again, Friday. My thanks to you for coming up on a day that is not our normal briefing day, and I appreciate it. Have a lovely day. And we will see you next week. Tuesday and Thursday is my, where is it? Is security?
In the land of the brave. So raise the flag and sing it loud. We are the strong, the free, the proud, forever true, forever brave. This is our home, the land they gave.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to, well, cut through the noise and bring you the vital insights you need on the world's most critical events. And today we're really plunging into a conflict that feels like it's redefining global tensions. I mean, what does it truly mean when major powers are not just, trading blows, but actively targeting leadership and critical infrastructure? It's pretty intense. We're talking about explicit statements from Israel like preventing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's existence being an objective, or Iran launching advanced missiles, even using cluster munitions designed to scatter explosives. That's a different level. This isn't just about military might anymore, is it? It feels like shifting red lines, maybe an unprecedented level of direct engagement that really demands our close attention. And look, in a world just saturated with information, getting the full nuanced picture, especially when things are moving this fast,